Hello and welcome to the Magic Hour. Today, on episode 10 of the Magic Hour, we have myself, Andrew, from Magic Valley. We have our CEO and founder, Paul Bevan, and we have our head of innovation, Jacob Goodwin. And today's a special episode because there's been some really exciting news in the last week come out of the United States. Paul, do you want to tell us about what that news is?
Sure. Thanks for the intro, Andrew. Jacob, good to see you back in the studio as well. Yeah, excellent. There's been some really big news. Last week in the US, we have finally seen the USDA provide approval for cultivated meat products from two companies to be sold in the US. That was following. It was a bit of a funny situation, really, because we saw the FDA provide approval. I think it was about 6 months ago now, maybe a bit more.
Approval or no further questions?
No further questions. Yeah, that's right. So the FDA sort of signed off on their part, and then early last week we saw the USDA provide approval for the labelling of the products.
And was that cell cultivated chicken?
Cell cultivated chicken, yeah, exactly, was the label that they approved. And then within 24 or 48 hours, and that they then provided USDA approval for the manufacturing facilities for those products. And so, the final sign off for that to be approved. I don't know why they didn't sort of do that together. It seemed a bit weird to me.
Maybe they just needed to get all their ducks in order with the companies for their press releases, and it was sort of a lot of behind the scenes stuff, and they wanted it all to come out at the same time. And
yeah, but it didn't though. That's what I mean. Yeah. Like the couple of days in between, that's why it sort of didn't make sense to me. I thought, now we've got to wait another few months to get the facility approved, but that's not the case. Anyway, so what that all means is, it's huge news for the industry. Obviously, a lot of regulators across the world follow the lead of the FDA and the USDA, which holds cultivated meat and the cultivated meat industry in really good stead for regulatory approval. In other regions, Australia, hopefully being one of those. But it just provides a really massive sign off, I guess, on cultivated meat. As you said, the labelling is cell cultivated chicken. So both companies in the US are doing a chicken product or have had a chicken product approved. And that obviously follows, Singapore's initial approval of a cultivated chicken product back in 2020 as well. So, hopefully this opens the doors for some more approvals in the US, but also right across the world, because as we know, the regulators here in Australia that are relevant to us is Food Standards Australia and New Zealand, and they obviously talk to Singapore, the SFA in Singapore, the USDA in the US. Canada has a separate regulator as well.
Yeah, I believe they do.
Yeah, their name escapes me at the moment, but they're all working to standardise as much as possible the regulatory approval requirements across those regions. So this is just massive for the industry all around. And we thought it was coming this year, but we didn't know when. We didn't know when it was going to happen.
And I think it's super exciting because of the size of the market in the US. Chicken's the most popularly consumed meat in the US. So for two companies to have the ability to sell within that large market compared to one company only able to sell in Singapore. But I think there's still some hold up, or not hold up, but there's still some scaling issues. Jacob, I don't know if have you read up on what happens, where they're going to release these products in the different companies in the US? I think it's a couple of different restaurants that they're looking at.
The first port of call is to partner with some restaurants.
Which makes sense, obviously at, smaller scale production, until you're able to, be, pumping out hundreds of thousands of kilos, it makes sense to be distributing, I guess, as it were, through restaurants. I mean, that's, sort of what we've sort of outlined as our approach as well. I think in the US, one of the companies has their own manufacturing facility and one is using a contract manufacturer, which is a interesting differentiation between the two. Obviously, there's differences in capital outlay and expense for both of those approaches. So it'll be interesting to see how they both work out. Which one can scale faster, through the contract manufacturer or through their own facility, and the products that flow on from there.
And I believe the contract manufacturer had their facility approved by the USDA at the same time. So whether that means they're now potentially available as a facility for other companies as well, or whether there's an exclusive arrangement in place, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And as you mentioned, the US is such a massive market in terms of the consumer as well. It's just, look, it really is exciting news for everyone in the industry. And as you mentioned, the focus on chicken, as we know, a number of companies are focused on chicken, but chicken is we slaughter the most chickens in the world. So it's over 70 billion, I think, of chicken alone, which is by far the most. So, there's a lot of positives to come out. Well, there are 3 chicken products now in Singapore and one in Singapore and 2 in the US. And there's been a lot of talk as well about potentially a seafood product being regulated next in the US, which I think only needs 1 approval. I can't remember now whether it's just FDA or just USDA. I think it's just FDA.
I think you might be right there.
Yeah. So, there's there's been talk about that for a while, actually, probably for over 6 months, that, that the FDA will provide approval for that product, which then obviously, is a little bit simpler, only having to go or get approval from one of the bodies. So hopefully that happens this year as well, which would be also a really exciting step. But just going back to the consumer, look, if consumers in the US can finally try cultivated, cell cultivated chicken. Got that right? Yeah, cell cultivated chicken. That'd be massive, because as we've seen, just for ourselves doing tastings, people being able to actually try the product, taste the product, smell the product, get the mouthfeel and everything, because obviously we're a tech company, but we're also producing a food product, and so lots of people interested in the tech. But when it comes down to it, the reality is, if people don't like eating the product, or the tech is useless, because people aren't going to buy it and eat it, or what's the point? So it just makes it really real and tangible. And as you said, distributing through restaurants in the US, that'll give early adopters a chance to. I think one of the companies were they running a competition or something to be one of the first to come and taste the products. Yeah, which is a great idea. I think it builds up the excitement around it as well. And it just holds everyone in good stead throughout the industry, because there's been a lot of, we get asked the question a lot, what about regulation, or what if you never get what if it never gets regulated, or how long is it going to take? When can you start selling, and those sorts of things. So this dispels a lot of those questions around actually the product coming to market.
Absolutely. Now, Paul, hypothetically, if let's say you were a small startup company making a cultivated meat product in a different jurisdiction, what are some of the flow-on effects you think might be useful for a hypothetical company like that?
Very hypothetical question, Andrew. Look, it's really good for that company, which is in a nascent industry. As I mentioned before, to provide really validity of the ability to bring a product to market, and I think also it raises some more questions around scalability as well, and in terms of what comes next for those companies, and how quickly they are able to scale, and how their technology does scale. Which would be really interesting to see. I guess for your hypothetical company in a different jurisdiction, it also brings up a lot of awareness and publicity. Obviously, I've said this a million times, but the US is a huge market. A large number of consumers. And large media presence, a lot of, even culturally, a lot of countries, and Australia is probably one of them, follows the US and what is happening over there in all aspects of culture. And so I think the awareness that it raises now around a really widely consumed meat, being able to be made through cell cultivation, and then consumers being able to try it and buy it and give it a go and give their feedback on the product. It really just, I think it lifts everyone within the industry. And it just makes it more real. Like it's here now. It's not some, futurist. I mean, it's been here, as we know, it's been around already for a few years, but it just makes it a lot more tangible for people, and it brings it into the mainstream as well, I think. So, Singapore's quite a small market, but the US, is considered, not just huge, but really the mainstream, as it were. And so I think it is just really beneficial for every company within the industry, regardless of what they're focusing on, even just through, the media attention and awareness and, now the consumer awareness around it. I think is huge.
Absolutely. And I know at Magic Valley, the morning it came out, we're all super excited, and just the number of contacts with people asking us about our product, without us putting out any press or media about it. A lot of people have been asking us, well, what's happening in Australia? How quickly is it going to follow on? Yeah,
absolutely. And, we provided obviously commentary to a couple of media outlets around that as well. But we do get that question. Well, it's raised a lot of questions actually about, will those companies be able to, export their products to Australia? My understanding is they still need Food Standards Australia and New Zealand approval to do that. So that probably is not happening anytime soon, as far as we know. But potentially, now that they've got those products approved in the US, it might make it easier to get approval in Australia, whether that's export or to set up a facility here and do that. People have asked, does it make things easier for us, or does it, no? People ask, can we sell our products in the US now? And the short answer to that is no. Every company has to go through their own individual approval process at this stage, anyway. So no, it doesn't mean we can start selling our products or other companies can start selling our products. It is restricted to those two companies that do have approval for their process. There are no questions asked letter. The labelling and the manufacturing facilities. So
and their specific cell lines.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. And as we've touched on a couple of times in previous episodes of the podcast, everyone's using a different process. Everyone is mostly using different cell lines, and also looking at different species and different products. And so that's sort of why everything has to be regulated on a product by product basis, and product by company basis, because everyone's doing different things. And it's something we talk about a lot in terms of the process and cell lines and media development and bioreactors and all those sorts of things. So look, it really is a massive milestone being able to get into a market like that and see the products available for sale. And it'll be really interesting to see the consumer response to that.
Definitely.
Have either of you been in the US recently?
No.
Not since pre-COVID days.
Yeah, no, that's a while ago. Well, I've only been once, and it was actually in March this year. And I guess I was in a bit of a bubble when I was there as well, because we were talking about food tech and cultivated meat, particularly. I was constantly talking. Whoever was listening to me was hearing about it anyway. So it'd be really interesting to see the consumer response to it.
Yeah, look, I mean, like any new thing, I'm sure it'll be to some degree polarizing, and it'd be super interesting to see the availability of it, how quickly the companies can scale and get it out to more than a restaurant or two, and just to see what happens over the next months to years.
Yeah, and the differences between the products too, which I think is really interesting, because we've got two cell cultivated chicken products going to market at the same time from two different companies. So it'll be interesting to see, particularly the consumer feedback to that, whether they prefer one over the other, and the different processes and the products that they're putting out, and price points, I guess, as well, as you mentioned, as well as availability.
Yeah, and look, I don't think there's a huge difference in the cell lines that they're using to make their products. But Jacob, do you want to give us a little bit of an overview on the way these companies are making their cultivated chicken meat products?
Sure. So both of the companies are taking a fibroblast approach. So they take some fibroblasts from an animal or a cell line repository. These generally are going through an immortalization process where they're being spontaneously allowed to grow indefinitely, and that just allows them to grow their mass from these fibroblast cells.
So, yeah, you're probably going to ask the same question as I am.
You go, Andrew.
So can you give us a more laid description of spontaneous immortalization?
So spontaneous immortalization is basically what it sounds like. So you have your cells that are growing under normal culture conditions. Normally, cells will undergo what's called senescence, which there's a limit to how much a normal cell can replicate in culture. And what they've basically done is just wait around long enough for a mutation event to occur. And this has given them an advantage that allows them to divide and sort of bypass this Hayflick limit. So yeah, it's completely just a random, spontaneous event that occurs that is working for them.
And I know the answer to this question, but isn't that a GMO or a genetically modified organism?
I guess it depends on your definition, whether it's a naturally occurring event, this is a random event, and naturally occurring mutations occur all of the time. A lot of the times within our bodies and with animal bodies, the cells would be taken care of by our immune systems, but in ex vivo sort of condition, they're allowed to proliferate. So yeah, I guess it depends on your jurisdiction that you're under and what's defined as a GMO. But it's, I guess there is a modification to the genome itself, but in this case, it's natural.
And so is that spontaneous immortalization a one-off event? And so that will be continuing to multiply indefinitely from that point, or would it need to happen over and over? Like, how scalable is that?
I guess it really depends on the mutations. It's probably not going to be a single mutation. It's going to be an accumulation of mutations that allow the cells to divide. As long as the cells can continue to divide, they should be okay. But with every new species, or if you want to look at different breeds, then that's going to have to occur every single time. And it's not, it's not a timed event. You can't sort of plan for how long these things will take to immortalize themselves. It's sort of a completely random process.
But roughly, I think in general, the spontaneous immortalization, that they put the cells through about 50 passages to see if they're stable genetically from the beginning of that process to the end of that process. And so that's more than 50 cell doublings, but it's a long and laborious process to make sure that they've got a cell line that is stable enough for them to spend a lot of money on to get regulated to sell as a product.
It seems like a very different approach when you're trying to, have a consistent process as possible particularly for regulatory approval, but also to replicate that at scale, and then having to basically do it all over again, or wait for that to happen with other species and other products that you want to produce. It sounds really inefficient.
Look, in some ways, yes, but once you have a good cell line, and how you define a good cell line, maybe we can talk a little bit about later, but a good cell line is pretty valuable.
But we think it would be potentially GMO.
No, by definition, in the US, the method they have used for spontaneous immortalization is not GMO.
Oh, okay.
I think one of the companies has also got a no questions asked approval for a specific genetic modification.
Okay.
But whether that is what they're running with the actual product that they're going to sell, that's not clear yet.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So some of it's still a bit grey. Interesting. And what about, I guess, I mean, that's not the approach we're taking, obviously, with cell lines or GMO. Obviously, we're using induced pluripotent cells for our products. Do you want to talk a little bit around that? And I know we've talked about the benefits of it previously, but just to highlight, I guess, the differences between the approaches.
So the main differences I see is that making induced pluripotent stem cells using a method that doesn't change the sequence of the DNA so it's not a GMO product. It's a more generally applicable technology to a number of different species relatively quickly. We've been able to make a lamb cell line and a pork cell line, and the beauty of induced pluripotent stem cells is they divide really quickly. You don't have to wait for spontaneous genetic mutations to make them grow fast. They grow fast straight up, and that's with the same DNA sequence that the cells from the animal started with. So it's in a lot of ways it's a potentially more stable system for making what I would call good cell lines that are going to be able to make lots of copies of themselves to make lots of products more quickly and more cheaply because they're dividing more quickly. I'm not sure if you want to add anything to that, Jacob.
Just from a regulatory perspective, it's come up in the American system and also here in Australia, New Zealand. There's a lot of focus that's been put on what's commonly consumed or has been routinely consumed and how different that is. So in terms of the cells that we have, we eat them, those cell types, when they're as part of the animal, but the ones that we have in our cultures, how different are they? So anything that we can do to keep them as similar as possible without modification should help that regulatory approval process.
Interesting. Do we know when they started the regulatory approval process, these companies in the US, like when they submitted their application? I haven't seen any.
I don't know.
On that. Yeah.
I mean, I can make a guess of it's more than 12 months ago.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
definitely. I was just wondering how long the entire process was. Anyway, pluripotent stem cell. So a embryonic stem cell is a type of pluripotent stem cell as well.
Yeah. So an embryonic stem cell comes from a donated, whether from the animal. If you can use that term, because it's pretty hard for an animal to consent to a donation, a donated very early stage embryo that is smaller than the size of a head of a pin, and there's a group of cells in there called a blastocyst, and you take those cells out of that embryo and grow them up in a special recipe that allows them to form. Those embryonic stem cells are pluripotent stem cells, and they're made quite differently and have a different source than induced pluripotent stem cells that can be made from any cell in the body. So in our case, we make them from a simple skin biopsy or a scavenged piece of ear punch from a procedure that an animal was going through, where there's some leftover tissue, and in both cases the animal lives quite happily afterwards. Those cells are then reprogrammed, so we add specific factors to them to push them back so that they have all of the characteristics of an embryonic stem cell, so they're also pluripotent, and pluripotent just means capable of forming all of the cell types of that animal.
Obviously without the destruction of an embryo.
Yep.
Yeah. Exactly. And my understanding is there's one of the companies in the US used an existing cell line that they obtained?
Yeah, they bought that cell line from an entity called the American Type Culture Collection. A lot of the scientists listening would know it as ATCC. And yeah, you can buy cell lines from that American Type Culture Collection as either research only, or you can buy a commercial license from that cell line. I believe they've then taken that that cell line and modified it to some extent for the cell line that they're using in production.
And we're obviously taking a vastly different approach, creating our induced pluripotent stem cell lines from scratch, from the biopsy, and doing all of that in-house, which again, I think the alternative approach is an interesting one because, as we've seen or as we know, cell lines and obtaining or developing your own cell line is not a simple process, and we've put a lot of work into that. And we know industry-wide, companies struggle with their cell lines or developing their own cell lines, and there's not a lot of cell lines available to purchase or to license, is there? But particularly with the type of technology that we're looking at, being an induced pluripotent stem cell line.
Not a lot at all from, especially from livestock species.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other point I'd like to make about us making our own cell lines as opposed to buying them off the shelf, which is kind of what one of these companies did, is what it does is gives us control from the very beginning of the process so that we can absolutely ensure that these cells have never seen any animal products other than the animal that they came from. And we, to my knowledge, we're one of the very few, if not only, companies in the world that can actually state that we know our cells have never seen any animal products.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's certainly my understanding. I'm happy to be corrected on that, but yeah, that would be my understanding as well. What else about cell lines? Because we've seen a couple of reports recently, like industry-wide reports on cell lines and the availability of cell lines. And as you mentioned, we're doing everything in-house, so all of that IP belongs to us. Those cell lines belong to us. What are some of the approaches that other companies are using? Obviously you mentioned purchasing something off the shelf. What are some other methods, I guess, of starting the process for developing cultivated meat that other companies are using?
I guess there's a number of different technologies or approaches people are taking. There's a few companies that have been doing ES cells, and it's mainly from species that have eggs because it's an easier process to obtain those early cells. We've looked at and we've had a look at companies that are using embryonic fibroblasts, so again, early stage fibroblasts that allow them to proliferate. Another approach is to look at the adult stem cell as a source, so muscle satellite cells or adipose precursor cells, and that allows you to expand for a limited capacity in culture, but there's some question to whether they are a long-term scalable alternative.
Yeah. And how would companies get those cells? Because I've seen some disturbing reports recently around, where that starter cell material comes from. So could you, for example, obviously it's easy for us to talk about our own process because we know our own process. So we take a sample of cells from a living animal that goes on continue living its life. I've read reports of samples being taken from slaughtered animals or animals being killed in the process of obtaining those starter cells, and also taking starter cells from dead animals. So from, or even from meat products. Like how is that possible? And what, I guess, are the concerns around those other approaches aside from the ethical concerns around it?
So for embryonic stem cells, obviously you are destroying an embryo. Depending on the species, you can do surgeries to take eggs. You're not necessarily killing the adult animal, but you're definitely taking the embryonic tissues. For large animals, again, you can take muscle biopsies or fat biopsies to get those cells. Again, you have to go backwards and forwards. For smaller species, I think it's not a very viable thing to take. Just a biopsy, it's probably the whole animal. So a lot of aquatic species especially are probably killed in that process.
So the recent report that came out, there was a survey of over 40 companies in that APAC region, I believe, that are looking at making cultivated meat products. The majority of companies' cell lines were from slaughtered animals, I believe, without naming specific companies because that information wasn't given. And the most desired cell lines for companies that were looking to get cell lines they had a few characteristics. So they were able to grow well. They weren't coming from a slaughtered animal, so the animal got to live, and they were able to grow in suspension. So often when cell lines are first made, they're made to grow on the surface. So that means they just grow in 2 dimensions on the surface of a piece of tissue culture plastic. So it can be a flask or a well plate. So what you really want is cells to grow not attached to anything, in suspension and growing really well and fast. It just allows for a higher density of culture so that your culture costs are less because you need to add less in to keep those cells going, and you don't need as much room in your bioreactors, for example.
So it's a much more efficient and cheaper process to doing it that way.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And we at Magic Valley, we're kind of happy to see that report because what that does is actually pretty much describe the cell lines that we've made from lamb and from pig, that we know the lamb and the pig are still happily living. We know the cells have never seen any other animal products. We know these cells grow quite fast, and we know they grow really well in suspension in spheroids, and we are and in the process of growing them in larger and larger vessels to test how far we can take them in terms of expansion, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, that's great news. Great news for us. But it was just interesting to see all the different approaches. I knew companies use different approaches, but I didn't know how different it was. It really is.
I think it's just an availability thing. So obviously we worked for a long time to get our cell lines to get up and running. And so a lot of companies have just gone with what's available and now having to go back to more appropriate cell lines.
Yeah.
So done the hard yards.
Yeah.
In the beginning.
When you say we, you mean you, Jacob. Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I've known our approach was different in that regard from the start. Like even from when we started, the idea was to create a scalable solution that could be done at a price point that was going to be palatable to the consumer. Because there's no point us, recreating a $200,000 or $300,000 burger in the lab that couldn't be scaled and was unaffordable. And I guess other companies have taken, as you mentioned, a slightly different approach of let's just get it done with what we can and what we understand now and get that done, and then work on refining the process later, where we've started with the end process in mind, which I think reflects a lot of the expenditure between the different approaches as well, and maybe time a little bit as well, because it's probably as you mentioned, it's taking us a little bit longer. When you see other companies, taking the alternative approach and doing things a little bit quicker, but now they've got to basically go back and start again to do what we're doing, whereas we're taking sort of the longer view approach, I guess, sure. In terms of what we're doing.
And so quite different. So people are using cell lines and reagents that are commonly used in research. So it's predictable, I guess, how those cells have reacted. If you look at the literature, it's predominantly, when you're talking about iPSCs, it's predominantly in human and mice because it's used for medical research purposes. And so the few papers that are available for other species, including agricultural species, it's quite difficult, and they're often described as putative cells rather than stem cells. So I think we're pretty on board to get our cells are pretty good comparatively to what's out there. So there's less information for us to go on, but we've managed to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And very much testament to yourself, Jacob, in terms of we as a company have been able to do. I guess on that topic, being able to develop those cell lines in-house, the amount of work we've put into that, and we've done it across species using the same platform, and also doing it all animal component free as well, and particularly with no FBS. That's the question we keep getting asked is around FBS, and how do you do, like, even from people within the industry, not in the cultivated meat industry, but also from regenerative medicine, and we had someone just the other day who'd been in the industry for over 10 years, and they're like, hey, but how do you do that? What are you doing? Like, how is that possible? But again, I always make it sound easy. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, of course it's possible, and it's been done before with human cells. It's been done. Why wouldn't we be able to do it when we're trying to grow up cultivated meat products? But I make it sound easy to this, but I know it's not easy.
Well,
and I'm sure you'll tell me it's not easy.
We're not going to tell anyone.
No, exactly. Yeah. Exactly right. But people are still shocked.
Maybe our patent attorney.
Yeah, exactly. But people are still shocked, like who have been working in regenerative medicine, for example, and been doing it one way for so long. They're just completely shocked when I tell them. And we always get asked about FBS. It's just a constant question.
I guess from an academic perspective, there's no reason to change. People like to do things. It's very traditional. They like to, you always do things the way things have always been done.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily look for alternative ways because it's just slow, and you're just building on other research. So
yeah,
I guess the way that we've really done things has changed the way that we approach how we do things, and you just sort of have to view everything as possible and just make it happen.
Yeah.
And that's a super exciting thing about working at Magic Valley, that it's a real challenge that was set to the science team when this started to do this without using animal products, and to basically do things that there is no pathway for. There's maybe pathways in other species, but there's no pathway in the exact species we've done to do exactly what we've produced since with the sheep and the pork IPS cell lines.
Yeah.
In terms of both making them without animal products and differentiating them, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the explanation you gave, like through academia, makes a lot of sense, Jacob. But maybe you can help me answer this question, because I get asked this question all the time. It's like, why are other cultivated meat companies still using FBS? Like, why do they still use it? And I struggle to come up with a good answer. I think it's partly, it's obviously effective and it works, right? And it's known, and it helps the cells to grow. We know all of that stuff. But why they haven't, and to your point, Andrew, I know we've focused on that from the start. And so, it's been 3 years that we've been focused on that. And I guess, some other companies are earlier and have taken a different approach. But do you have a good answer for why other companies are still using FBS? Because I struggle to provide that answer.
I have a really simple answer, because if you grow cells in FBS and then take it away, they will slow down. They won't. Yeah. They will not grow as well. They will not be happy.
Right.
Because FBS contains a whole bunch of different factors that are important for cell growth, and cells that have seen FBS will grow faster in FBS, and if you take it away, they will not be happy. I know that's an anthropomorphization of animal cells, but anyway.
Yeah, that's interesting. So they're used to the FBS, and then they have to be adapted away from FBS. And I guess that also raises concerns around the scalability of what has been achieved with those cells using FBS, and if they're going to perform differently or potentially worse in the beginning when you're trying to move them away. That's going to really affect your process, but your forecast as well, particularly when it comes to pricing and scaling and all those sorts of. Yeah, well, okay, interesting. What else have you seen in those recent reports, Andrew, that's caught your eye?
Look, I just think it's always interesting to me that the number of companies that are out there that are looking for cell lines that are up and running, but they're still looking for cell lines because they're maybe not happy with their cell lines. I think that was quite an interesting takeout. And
we've seen a lot of that publicly, but also privately as well. Yeah, that's a really good point. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, not at all. I guess we haven't really directly referred to where the reports come from, but what we'll do is for those that are interested in more information on the report, we'll add it in the liner notes of the podcast when the episode comes out. So if people want to go in and look in depth at this report, we'll give you the information on how to access it. It's a freely available report.
Was there anything else that caught your eye, Jacob, in any of those reports? Do you speak to other companies within the industry around cell line development? Do you get that question from? Like, I know we get a lot of approaches from people trying to sell us stuff all the time, particularly around media. Less so, I think, around cell lines because there's less people that have them. But do you speak to people at other companies about their process or the regulatory approval process or differences in terms of cell lines and using FBS and not using FBS and those sorts of things?
For me personally, not so much around the specific cell types and FBS usage and stuff like that.
Do most companies keep that information to themselves?
I think definitely.
Yeah.
It's something you hold closely. And obviously, if it's not the final way you want to do things, you try and don't want to share. Basically.
Yeah.
And it's also, there's a whole lot of money that's potentially locked away in these processes.
Absolutely. I find that really funny though. I mean, obviously it makes commercial sense about, going into the details and stuff, but we've been like blatantly open about what we're doing like from the very beginning. Whereas I think other companies have, that are using maybe a different approach or not quite as efficient approach, sort of keep it a bit quiet and don't talk about it, which I don't know. I don't know why I find that funny, but I do find that funny.
I know I've definitely been on a couple of Zooms with people from different continents that are starting out in cultivated meat companies that are looking to make their cell lines, that are asking for advice, and I'm very happy to talk to people about the broad strokes of how we do it.
Yeah, well, people ask me, like, particularly people that have been starting out and, the last 12 to 18 months, what cell type should we use? And I'm like, pluripotent. And they're like, oh, no, but so-and-so told me no, and so-and-so told me this. And so I'm like, okay, well, you asked, and I'm telling you what, our opinion is.
I mean, in some of the literature out there, the opinion-based literature, I'll call it, there's opinions about induced pluripotent stem cells being really tricky and hard to make. And yes, that is true if you don't know what you're doing. Yeah. But once they're up and running, they're pretty stable.
Yeah. So I guess that's another barrier to entry, I guess, or barrier to using this approach. Do you want to talk a little bit more about why it's a bit harder, why it requires a certain skill set or experience, or what makes it a little bit harder and take a little bit longer than just taking like a muscle biopsy, for example?
Yeah. Look, to be honest, I don't really know the answer to that question. I think I'm biased and I'm probably not the best person to answer that question because I've worked with induced pluripotent stem cells since they were first described. My lab was the first in Australia to work with human-induced pluripotent stem cells. So it's nearly 15 years I've been working with these cells now. So it's kind of I know a lot less about the muscle biopsy way to make stem cells.
So how long would people have been using muscle biopsies to make stem cells? A lot longer?
A lot longer. Yeah. Okay. And that's probably, there's a lot more potential recipes that people can follow in the scientific literature. People of muscle cell lines have been around for decades.
Yeah, so much older.
It does make some sense that there's more people with experience in that area that can help and know what sort of recipe you need to make the muscle biopsy cells grow. Yeah,
that makes sense. That's sort of been my feeling as well around a number of a number of companies that have been founded by scientists with that experience in terms of using, adult stem cells, and that's sort of the path that they've continued down, which makes sense if that's your area of expertise. Sorry, just going back, Jacob, to your point about talking to other companies and that. Sorry, I took us off on a tangent there, but just returning to your point about that.
I was just also going to mention that although we don't talk specifically about the cell lines necessarily, there's quite a collegial feel around the regulatory process. So both Andrew and myself are involved in a regulatory affairs day that had some for SANS people as well as some local government people, as well as both companies from cultivated meat as well as precision fermentation. And we're all sort of understand how difficult it is to walk alone. And so for the regulatory side of things and what's required for those, we're quite happy to work together. And
it was actually a really lovely day with a lot of goodwill, a lot of collegiality, and it was put together by Cellular Agriculture Australia, an industry group, and it was just it was actually really refreshing to see, okay, we've all got common problems. Let's work together to get through it. So no, it was great.
We should talk about that as well. It was a great couple of days up in Sydney as well. So on the back of the regulatory workshop that you just both mentioned, which again is something that I've mentioned on the podcast many times about. Jacob, what you just mentioned in terms of us working together with other people in the industry. Most people just simply cannot believe that happens, particularly when you talk to investors. They're like, what about this competition? What about that competition? What are they doing? And, these people are, your enemies basically. Like, it's just not like that at all. Like, everyone's working to help each other within the industry. As you've just outlined, so which I find it really amusing as well. I don't know, there's a lot of things I find amusing, but we had a great few days in Sydney. Obviously, that workshop that night we held our first tasting event outside of Melbourne in Sydney. So there was the three of us there, Wendy as well, and we debuted our latest creation, which was lamb cigars, along with our pork dumplings to an exclusive audience. And a couple of our friends from the entourage were there, obviously, as well, which was great to be able to host us up in Sydney, which was really exciting for us and exciting for us to showcase the products to some more people, because there's only been a couple of dozen now, I suppose, in total, people that have tasted the product. So that was exciting. I think it was well received, and the feedback around the products were good. I think we got a 10 out of 10 there as well, Andrew.
We did. Yeah. I think 10 out of 10 taste exactly like regular meat.
Yeah. So that's always good. And I guess off the back of that, I had some conversations around partnerships and collaborations and investment and all those sorts of things, which was great. So that was really good. And then the following day we had the inaugural Australian Cellular Agriculture Summit hosted by Cellular Agriculture Australia and Future Alternative. And I think there was 140 people there.
Felt like more.
It was an amazing day. It was really great, and just tying back into your earlier point, Jacob, around the collaboration that continued for the following day, and both Andrew and I spoke on panels, but there was people there from all over the industry. There's a lot of government people there. There was a lot of there's a few academics there. There's a few investors there.
People flown in from around the Asia Pacific region.
Yes, particularly from Singapore. Yep, that's a really good point. People from the regulatory authorities there. Lots of food science people there. Just lots of even people that were just interested in the development of cellular agriculture, whether they be from not-for-profit organisations or impact or climate-focused organisations, animal rights organisations,
some journalists,
people just wanting to find out more about the industry and what's happening, and obviously, not just cultivated meat, but precision fermentation as well. And it was a bit of a who's who of the industry in Australia, which was I had a great time there. I met so many new people, supportive people. Got to make lots of new connections, as well as meet people in person again for the first time. Seeing as we haven't had a lot of in-person events until recently, and it was really just a great. It was a really well-run event. There's lots of great content. It was a really great day. It was a really broad spectrum of people there.
And not totally importantly, but it was also much warmer and very sunny in Sydney the whole time we were there.
So much warmer. I got off the plane, it was like a heat wave, but it was only like 20 degrees or whatever. We're just used to it being like 12 or whatever it is here in Melbourne. Yeah, that was full on.
It was nice.
It was definitely good to get a bit of sunshine as well. But just back to that event itself. It showed a lot of. There's a couple of things, I guess. Doing the tasting the night before again gave us a little bit more validation as well around the products and what we're doing. But the event the next day as well, just having so many people there, and this is before the USDA announcement, and so much interest. In the industry, not to mention the people that want to come and work in the industry as well. There's a number of students there as well, people looking to change careers from their existing industry. Look, I just thought it was a fantastic event, and being the first one, and how much interest there is building, because we've been doing this for a couple of years now, and we're sort of it's been slowly, and people. You get a little bit more attention and there's a little bit more awareness. But for me, that just showed how much interest there is in the sector, how much collaboration there is going on. The piece that was missing for me was probably participation from the existing animal ag industry. I don't know that there was many people there, from traditional producers, because I know a lot of the questions were around, are you working with, traditional protein producers, and what's happening with those conversations, that was probably the one piece that was missing for me. I don't know if you met anyone that was from industry, existing industry.
Definitely from existing industry, but not. Quite large companies that work and have some interest in the precision fermentation side of things that were there.
Yeah.
And
no, you're right.
And some other bigger company representatives were there. For big multinational companies that have food divisions of all sorts, different sorts.
Yes.
Yeah.
No,
So I think they were there, but not in large numbers.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I did meet a couple of those people. I think they were doing a lot of observing as opposed to active participation in terms of the technology and that sort of thing. So it'd be really interesting to see how that develops as well. Our conversation. When I say our, I mean as an industry, conversations with existing industry and see what collaborations come out of that, and how the products are received moving forward.
And look, had a couple of really helpful conversations from people from those larger companies who'd worked through regulatory issues before, and just had lots of really great advice of as you're developing a food product, these are the sorts of things that you need to think about as you go through these different stages. And that only comes with experience, and that was wonderful.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. On the product development and food science sides, and product approvals. Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of government people there. There's a lot of people from government there, which was interesting as well. But a great event all round. Do you have any other comments on the event, Andrew?
I think I saw in the social media that somebody said it was a shame that the US announcement didn't come before that event. But building from the excitement from that event within Australia or within the Asia Pacific region, APAC, then having on top of that the US announcement, I feel like there's a real turning point that the last week or two has been, especially in Australia and the US, it's the dawn of the age of cell cultivated meats is here.
Absolutely, 100%, and I couldn't agree more. And the timing of those events, I think, was perfect, really, to be honest, because the excitement had built in Australia. We've all been to the summit. Get back home and catch up on some emails and catch up on work, and then we've got what's this week's announcements? USDA approval of the products. So look, we're certainly at an all-time high in terms of awareness now, and I think that'll continue not just through the media, but through consumers now as well. Because as you said, it's a massive turning point or inflection point. Instead of talking about it, oh, hey, guess what? You're in the US. Well, soon you're going to be able to try these products.
It's happening.
Yeah, exactly. All right, excellent. Jacob, anything you want to add?
I guess the US approvals also open up earlier avenues for exporting to the US as well, which is quite interesting.
Yes, absolutely. And we know there's a number of companies working in their home country that are looking to export to the US, being such a huge market as well. I don't know how many applications are in process in the US. I think it's got to be at least a dozen, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think the people were talking about different numbers at the summit.
Yeah, but they're obviously all lined up, which it'll be interesting to see how quickly those next approvals occur, because obviously we saw in Singapore, I think it was towards the end of 2020, that first approval, and what's that? It's only 3 years now, coming up to 3 years, and there hasn't been any more products approved. The US could just become the new hub. Yeah, exactly, which will be interesting to see.
Australia will be similar, because talking to Fasands at the regulatory meeting, they were talking about the length of applications, which, rightly so, has been quite a long process at the beginning.
Yeah.
With every subsequent application, I think will be faster, just because they will know more, they'll know the right questions to ask. So I think it'll be a great thing.
Makes sense. It's good for companies coming in just behind, like us.
Absolutely. Good for everybody.
Good for everyone. Yeah, no, exactly. Oh, look, I mean, I say that jokingly, but, it really is helpful for us having these other companies, pave the way, particularly in terms of the regulatory approval process. It'll make things a lot, I think, more, as you mentioned, more streamlined and simpler for us and all the, companies that are following suit. So it's really great for everyone.
And hopefully it shifts people's first thought when they hear about cultivated meat was, but didn't that burger cost $200,000
Yeah.
200,000 euros? To wait, what? You can buy it in a restaurant?
Yeah, it's a totally new narrative. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see the marketing approach they both take as well. I think both the marketing from both those companies to date has been outstanding in terms of what they put out. So fingers crossed that continues. All right, I think we've just about come to our end of the podcast, Andrew.
I think we might have. I think just leaves me to thank my panel co-hosts, Paul Bevan and Jacob Goodwin. Thank you very much. And for those of you listening, if you want more information on Magic Valley, please head to our website at www.magicvalley.com.au. Give us a follow on YouTube, where you can watch this podcast, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts. We've got a Twitter. We've got LinkedIn. We have pretty active on LinkedIn. We have Instagram. And we have TikTok. And for those of you interested in more information on that cell line report that we're talking about, we'll add that in the liner notes for the podcast. So thanks very much for listening to episode 10 of the Magic Hour.
Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Jacob.
Cheers.